Okay. Hello, everyone. Hello, welcome. Thank you for coming, and good to be back. Nice to see you here, and yeah, good to talk about languages with you again. So today I was thinking back of a question that I got during the last live, and that was about pronunciation and accent. So I wanted to talk about that a bit today. Before we get into the general question and answer part of the live. And I hope that you will enjoy my thoughts on pronunciation and accent, and I will look a little bit as well into how we actually work on them, so that if that's an important thing for you, then you will have some ideas of the things that I've done in the past that have worked or helped me to improve my pronunciation, my accent in various languages. And I hope that that will be useful for you to have my experience. So, first of all, pronunciation and accent. What do we mean by pronunciation and accent? I know sometimes that these things are used interchangeably, and I am aware that for a number of people, they talk about accent when actually they mean pronunciation. And this is quite a common thing to mix up. So pronunciation is actually pronouncing the words, the sounds of the language as they're meant to be pronounced with regard to the variation of the language that you're studying, so whether that's a standard form, whether that's a dialect form, whether that's a form from another country where the language is also spoken from the one that you originally started with. Whatever it is, there are different types of standards that you might have for pronunciation. And so when we talk about pronunciation, we talk about reproducing these sounds. Now, when these sounds go together, there are a number of things that take place and take shape with them, and that can be things like the porosity or the melody of the way you put these sounds and words together in a sentence, the way that you use intonation to express what you're trying to say, what you want to communicate. And with this pronunciation mixed with the melody and the intonation that you use, you start to hear different accents. And the accent is really that kind of layer over the pronunciation that can help to show where you're from. So, for example, I'm from the north well, my accent is from the north of England, and it's a standard Northern English accent. And how you can hear that is the way I pronounce words like bath, grass, glass. And the reason I pronounce them that way is because that's my original way of pronouncing them. Now, my original dialect is Scouse, which is from Liverpool, and that's my original English dialect. Now, if I were to say glass this is my standard Northern English, if I were to say in Scouse, it would sound glass. You can hear that there are other sounds and things going on there that go around that same sound for the glass. So you get this on many words and across sentences to give a lilt or a way that the language then sounds as a whole thing. So as an English speaker, there are many different ways of speaking English. And in fact, one of the questions I got on Instagram before this started was, how do you understand the Irish accent? Well, there's not just one Irish accent, there are many Irish accents. So there are different ways of speaking with an Irish accent in English. And so there are different ones in Northern Ireland, there are different ones in the Republic of Ireland. And so there's not just one way, unfortunately, that they speak. And sometimes they can be challenging for people who are learning English as a second language. I think partly because it's a smaller country, so you hear fewer people speaking with an Irish accent. And so what tends to be most widely used is the standard form of of English spoken in England that you hear on the BBC very often. Similar thing with American Standard English. There's a very standard sort of American sounding way of speaking English that they use on the news quite often as well, and on TV shows, whereas the variations don't tend to be used as much. So when we talk about sort of understanding these accents, I think there's quite a lot to sort of dig into there, and I think that comes with practice. Pronunciation, though, is really, I think, the key thing, and this is where I always say pronunciation is important. Pronunciation basically is when you get a book like, let me take just the first book I can grab off my shelf without breaking my neck, is the Complete Serbian book. Now, in the Complete Serbian book, you have very first bit, like in most language learning books, it will go through the pronunciation, it will go through the alphabet, it will show you how the alphabet looks, what it sounds like, and then it will give you lots and lots of exercises to pronounce words so that you pronounce them the way the language, the standard language, the language that you're studying, that version, so that you can attempt to speak and pronounce in a way that's then understandable to people who speak this language. So what often happens as a language learner is we say to ourselves, and please do let me know if this is you, I know this has been me on occasion, and is that we go, da-na-na-na-na, yeah, this is really easy. Okay, where's lesson 1? Okay, and you get to lesson 1 or to lesson 2 if lesson 1 is taken up with all of this nonsense about pronunciation and alphabet, and we get to lesson 2 and we're like, okay, greetings and introduction, yeah, I want to start here because I want to say something. Now, if we neglect this, this first part, this first chapter, or the introductory chapter before we get on to actually learning the language, what we can end up doing is creating an incorrect way of pronouncing the words, and therefore replicating the language in a meaningful way to people who speak the language. And if we do that, and we don't get out of that habit very quickly, unfortunately, those bad habits can stay with you forever, or for a very, very long time, and become quite difficult to erase. So my first thing would be to say to you, if you want to speak a language, no matter what language, the accent is a different thing. So let's leave the accent to one side for now. The pronunciation is important. And the pronunciation is important because we need to convey meaning. In order to convey meaning, we need to be able to say things in such a way that people who speak the language understand what we're saying or what we're trying to say. So definitely, as hard as it sometimes is, don't skip chapter 1 or the beginning chapters, because you will miss quite a lot. I recommend, if you're using a book, that you use the book and its exercises as they're set out, so that you practice, record your voice, hear yourself speaking. How are you saying it? Are you pronouncing it in the same way as the people who are speaking on the recording, or are you saying it differently? Can you hear the difference? If you have an italki teacher or another teacher, if you go to a class, just ask them to listen to you say the word. If you've got friends, ask them. If you've got family, you can ask your family. Even if you have a group on the internet that you can ask and say, okay, if I record my voice, can you please give me feedback on how well I'm reproducing these words? And speak the words, say the words. Make sure that you get that critical feedback, because when you get the feedback on how you're pronouncing it, that's how you can then start fine-tuning the way you pronounce it. Just to give you a couple of examples from my life, I studied Swedish at university, and I think I've told many people about this before, but if you've not heard it, then I'll just repeat it for you, so that you are aware of sort of my background. So we studied Swedish for 1 year at university, and the first year was almost exclusively dealing with pronunciation of Swedish. Swedish has so many sounds in it that it takes a long time to get the sounds quite right and understandable for the Swedish ear to understand what we're trying to say. And so we did many of these activities, like recording our voices, getting feedback from our teachers, listening to where the sounds were produced, finding out, is there a vibration in the throat? Is there no vibration in the throat? Where is my tongue position? Is it behind my teeth, the upper teeth, behind the lower teeth? Is it on the palate of my mouth, the roof of my mouth? Is it back? Do I trill my R? Do I not trill my R? All of these different things that you do, and where is the air coming out? Is it coming out the sides of your mouth? Is it coming out of the front of your mouth? You need to be very, very conscious of all of these things when you're trying to learn to pronounce a new language, simply because if you are not aware of how you pronounce it and where the position of your tongue is, and you just say it as you think you hear it, sometimes it can be slightly off, and you may say something slightly different. The example I use is for many English speakers. In French, the word for a lot is beaucoup, and what a number of English speakers tend to do when they've learnt the word, the sound, which is used in many different things in French, like tu, they sometimes have a tendency to overuse that u sound where the u sound is used. And so what will happen, instead of saying beaucoup, they'll say beaucoup. And beaucoup means beautiful bottom in French, which isn't quite what they want to say, but they may say merci beaucoup instead of merci beaucoup. And these are the kinds of small things that you need to sort of fine tune when you're learning a new language, or you're trying to improve the language you speak. Sometimes as well, when you've got these errors in your brain, they, as I said before, they are very difficult to get out. And one way of getting rid of some of these errors is talking to speakers of the language and asking them where they position their tongue, where their teeth, where, how they use their teeth, the sound comes out, where the vibrations are, all those things that I described before, and then getting them to listen to how you pronounce these certain words and getting feedback on that. And then do it yourself, to train yourself to be able to listen to how you sound, so that you can say, oh no, actually I said that wrong. Consciously think about it as well, of course, it's very important. So I did that for Swedish for 1 year. And so at the end of my 1 year, my first year of Swedish at university, the teacher said, if I can guarantee one thing, it will be that you will be able to read the IKEA catalogue without any problem. And the teacher was right. The other thing that I've been doing recently is on Clubhouse, I've been having Haitian Creole lessons. And I actually really like what the teacher's doing, because she said, we're going to go over the pronunciation. And we've done 3 1-hour slots just on pronunciation so far. We've not even started speaking it at all. It's just been pronunciation. And I quite like that that's been a focus of it, because what can happen, and what happens very often, especially if you speak a language that's similar to the language you're learning, is that you can have interference from the sounds of the other language. Where if you learn and concentrate a lot on the sounds of the new language, it helps to reduce that issue for you. So particularly if you're learning a language that you already understand to a degree, I really recommend that you spend the time getting used to the sounds of the new language, simply because it's very, very easy to jump straight in, miss all of the introductory lessons, and go maybe straight into lesson 4, because you think, okay, well, I know the basics. I know how to introduce myself, and I know how to say hello, and I can pronounce it. I understand it, so it's fine. And I'll just dive into where the meaty bits of the grammar is, and where the interesting things are in the book, and you skip all of that great stuff, and you end up speaking some mishmash of 2 languages, which doesn't really do very much for you, except you can continue to communicate. But what happens is people who speak that language will think that you are a speaker of the other language, and you're just trying to pass yourself off as a speaker of this new language. That kind of happens with even sometimes when you do pay attention, but it's really, really important that you look at it and consider that when you're trying to learn a new language. I did get a question here at the beginning on YouTube as well before we started, and that was how important, I think, for speakers of English as a second language is it to understand the accents in the UK. Accents like Cockney, Scouse, or Scottish. You find it. They say they find it very cool. Yeah, I think it is good to have a sort of an idea of different types of accents in language. It tends to be something that you get over time, and it tends to be something that grows in sort of your knowledge grows with these kinds of things as you move on with your language learning and you have more experience with different speakers of the language. I know that's definitely the case for me, and has been over the years. When I first start a language, it all just sounds like the language, because I may hear some differences, but generally it tends to be, okay, that's the language. I recognize just the general sounds of the language and the grammar and the words. As I move forward into the language and start hearing different ways of using it, I might start picking out, oh, that's not the word that I learned, or that's not the word that people where I live use, or that's not the way they pronounce it, or that's not this, or that's not that. And then you start understanding the differences between the different dialects and accents within the language group itself. And I've definitely found that over the years for many languages, that I could start hearing the differences, and sometimes I started with dialects. In fact, I mean, where I would learn it in a place where the standard language wasn't used, and so for me, it's always kind of been a whatever comes first, the chicken or the egg, and I never really paid too much attention to it. But I think over time you can, whether or not you then make a concerted effort to listen to more accents, I think that goes down onto you, and you have to decide how you do that. Finding TV shows or things that use regional variations of a language can be a good way of doing it. Asking other people who speak the language if they can recommend somewhere where they can hear, where you can hear this kind of thing is really good. But yeah, you can. Sometimes some of the accents, regional accents, are not used in mainstream media, and so that can be a bit of a challenge at times. And it takes a little bit more effort to try and do that. I know for certain languages, and they'll have TV shows or series where they'll have somebody who speaks a different variant of the language, and it will just be as part of the character in a soap opera or something like that, and you can kind of start hearing from that kind of thing. But this is definitely further on in your learning, and something I'd say that really from probably, I guess sometimes at B1 you can hear it. I'd say really starts to fly from B2, C1, where you really start making these differences. At B1, sometimes you do, and you might be taught some words even sooner than that. I think that that this is the way that people might say it in a certain region, particularly if it's very famous for the country and they like to tell that story. Now, when it comes to accent, my personal version of this, my personal view on this, would be that it's not so important to have what they call a perfect accent. Now, what is a perfect accent anyway? The issue is you have to think why you want to have a perfect accent. And some people say, I want to fool people into thinking I'm from that place. Well, okay, maybe you might get an accent that's close to how somebody sounds who speaks the language. However, I've never actually met somebody who's spoken English to the point or to the level where I will have an hour-long conversation with them and I don't know that they're not from another place. I've never been fooled into thinking somebody's from a place that they're not, is kind of what I'd say has been the case. And I've met many people who learn English. English is probably the most studied language in the world. And so I meet a lot of people. I've met people who come very close, but there'll always be some telling sign. And the reason why there's a telling sign, I think, is not necessarily because people can't reproduce an accent very faithfully. I think that people can reproduce an accent faithfully. I think that there's a psychological reason why that doesn't happen. And the psychological reason I would give is if somebody arrives in a country after a certain age, and I would probably say after their teenage years, their early teenage years, and then they learn the language as a second language, and so don't go to school through the language. They don't grow up speaking it or interacting as a child or a teen with other teens who speak the language and interact with the TV shows and popular culture and all that kind of stuff. If that doesn't happen, it can be extremely challenging to then almost fake being from somewhere you're not. So by the same token, I'm not going to be able to move to anywhere in another country where they even speak English and 100% fit in and pretend like I'm from there. Even if I could, and I would to join a conversation with a very good accent, a very authentic sounding accent. What happens when I get to cultural knowledge that people would expect me to know? What happens if I don't know the old lady that used to work in the corner shop that everybody knew in that town? What happens if I don't know the TV show that everyone's laughing and joking about around the table at a bar or in a restaurant? What happens if I didn't go to school and therefore can't really talk about the type of system that I wasn't in and they were in? There are so many different things that you cannot fake in a language. And so it gets to the point as to why would you even bother? As far as I'm concerned, an accent is not a bad thing. An accent is a badge of who you are and where you're from. And I understand that, especially in certain countries, it can be something that you may even people sometimes criticize, and you feel conscious about it. And there are ways to sort of go through sort of accent reduction, and that would be following those same steps that I talked about pronunciation, using those types of techniques and understanding where the sounds are made in your head, understanding the tongue position, understanding where the sounds come from, understanding where the air comes out of your mouth, all these kinds of things you can do to improve the sounds so that with your pronunciation improving, your accent tends to improve too. Now, will you get rid of it completely and have an accent sounding like someone from a town you decided to move to? Well, probably not, because even somebody from the country will not be able to achieve that in the same way either if they move at a later age. The only way you really do that is if you integrate into a local culture and society at a young enough age where you're sort of part and parcel of that community. It is very difficult to achieve a later stage through learning. As I said before, I don't even know how desirable it would be. I would find it quite weird, personally, if I were to make a friend and they were to pretend that they were from a place they were not from, because they wanted to pass for a local. And so you could get into very weird conversations where you were talking about their country and they didn't tell you they were from there, and it would just be very odd. I would find it very odd. I mean, I get why some of the reasons are that people would want to withhold certain bits of information. There are lots of stories, there are lots of narratives that go with this. It's a very layered issue. But as a language learner, purely as a language learner, I would say I much prefer to just stand up and say, of course, well, I don't say it exactly perfectly 100% of the time. It's normal. There are words, even in my home language of Macedonian, that I will still say incorrectly from time to time. And there are words that I pronounced incorrectly in the beginning and didn't properly correct and find it difficult to correct them now. And I have to be very conscious about that. But look, it's not the end of the world. It doesn't hamper my ability to communicate with local people. It doesn't stop me from interacting in society and doing what I need to do. And it certainly doesn't stop me from understanding what people say. So accent, it's very easy for me to say, and it sounds a little bit, I find can sound a little bit sort of the right thing to say, but it doesn't really help. An accent is a badge of who you are and where you're from. It's true. And it can be a sign of pride, and it can be a sign of, I speak another language, and you're showing that to another person. But I get that me saying that can sound great to other people and the right thing to say. But I do know that inside, some people who speak and feel that their accent is strong and feel that they get negative reactions and negative criticism from other people, where they're trying to fit in a society. I understand that it's difficult and it's tough. So I'm not going to patronize you and say, oh yeah, I know you should be proud. Of course, I think you should be proud. At the same time, I'm not going to patronize you, because I do know that, and I understand from personal experience, that it's not the easiest thing to deal with sometimes on a day-to-day basis. So I would go back to my part on pronunciation if you really want to work on that, and you can have a look and see how you may be able to reduce your accent and improve your pronunciation at the same time with the words, and look at the words in sentences and look and at how they fit together. Because doing something like Luca Lampariello says, for example, with writing out words and sentences and then seeing how the patterns and stress of the pronunciation fits together, not just as a single word, but in an entire sentence. I'll give you an example. So if I say the word your, Y-O-U-R, your, and then I give you the word arm, A-R-M. Now, if I put those together in normal colloquial speech in English, I will say your arm. The R actually shifts over to the arm. So it sounds like you're saying your arm, your arm. And I'm not saying your arm, but it does sound like I'm saying your arm. And these are things that, as if you just learn word by word, you would say your arm, and you'd maybe have a split in the way you say it so that it doesn't run together in a more natural way. Because sometimes you learn the way you pronounce it, but then you have to learn how you pronounce it within certain blocks of language, certain sentences, so that it runs together. You can learn French in a similar way and learn je ne sais pas. But in France, realistically, people don't say je ne sais pas unless they really want to emphasize je ne sais pas. They may say it in that way. Je sais pas. They will run words together. They will miss out the n. That's how people will speak when they actually use language. So it's very, very important to notice how people use the language in real context. Sometimes it's not exactly as we learn in the books, and sometimes we need to make extra effort to pick up the language we want to use, find out with feedback from people, see how we use it, and go through that way. I have some comments here which are great, saying that using shadowing people have found useful. Shadowing is where you listen to the language and you repeat it as you listen to it. So it's almost like you're doing simultaneous interpretation, but just staying in the same language. So you basically repeat what you hear. And if you want to see how that happens, Professor Alexander Arguelles has a video of himself doing exactly that. And so I think that it would be, if you want to have a look at how that works, you can definitely do that. I would say that if you write certain things out that you say regularly and often, that you write out like almost as a script that you know, you can then check that with a teacher or with another speaker or with a friend who speaks the language, and just have them check, okay, how would you say it and how do I say it? Get them to read it in a very fluid and fluent manner, so it would sound natural. I mean, what we don't want is something that ends up, sounding a bit fake. Now you can, when you go into a language, for example, English is obviously is an easy example for me. You can hear the word like 20. 20 is obviously 20, the number. Now, many English speakers will say 20, 20, 20. And you can hear it doesn't sound like 20 anymore, it sounds like 20. So you almost get rid of that T, and you can go too far with this. So if I say 20, I would not say that myself personally, but many English speakers would, and that's fine. I just don't, and it's one of those words that many parents will correct their children and try and get them to add the T back in and say 20, and they will get them to say the word 20, 20, 20 instead of 20, 20, 20, 20, 20, 2020, 2021. People will say 2021, 2021, and you have to make a decision as well. how you want to sound in a language. Do you want to sound like you're speaking a dialect that would be corrected, or well, it's not even a dialect actually, this 20, it would be used in a number of dialects in English, but it's kind of it's almost seen as a lazy way of pronouncing 20. So um, as I say, I don't mind it personally when other people use it, but it does give off a certain idea about you. People have prejudices with if you pronounce things a certain way in languages as well. It's not just a case that you learn a language with a dialect or an accent. It also carries a lot of baggage in every single language. This is true. I remember at school, when I was at school, our teachers played different English accents on a tape, and we had the list of accents and dialects, and then a list of jobs that those people would do, and it would show you the inbuilt prejudice against certain people because of the way they spoke, and it was really quite eye-opening for me. It's one of the things that sticks in my mind the most from my school years. I was very young when we did this, but what I found striking for me personally, I was probably around 11 or 12 when I did this. And one of the accents actually was my own original accent in English, my own dialect in English, which is Scouse. And pretty much all of the kids described that as being sort of somebody who wouldn't be very intelligent, very bright if they spoke with that accent. And I found it quite soul destroying, to be honest, that activity, because it basically was how my entire family spoke, and so it's not easy to sort of face up to those realities. And as you get older, you start to realize how the wider public sees accents, and how they see you really as a person, as an individual, and how they see your family, and how they see your friends, where you're from, and how you're viewed in the wider society of the country. And definitely, it's a big consideration as a speaker of a language where you're born into a linguistic group, and you know that, for example, if I were to speak in my original way at job interviews, that I would not be perceived in the same way as I am speaking in the way I speak now. I didn't consciously change my accent in English, and a good linguist would definitely hear elements of my original dialect still in my Northern Standard English. However, most English speakers would not. They would people from where I'm from would say that my accent now sounds sort of posher, and that in and of itself is also quite strange, because it shows you that these accents make you belong to a social group or seen as an outsider from a social group. These are, I hate to give you all of this, but it did make me think that if you are choosing an accent, or if you want to, you do need to be aware when you're looking at how you put these things together, particularly in a language like English. If you are looking at how words are put together, make sure it's an English that you want to identify with, and one that belongs to you and you feel represents the authentic you. So people often talk about, when you learn a language, find somebody who speaks with a voice similar to yours, but in the other language. So, for example, if you have a voice with the same kind of depth as mine, then you would want to find somebody who speaks in a similar tone. There's no point finding somebody who speaks very, very high or very, very low, because it's going to be a lot harder for you to really imitate that in the same way faithfully as somebody who speaks in a similar way. The same goes, unfortunately, for gendered language. So people learning languages like Japanese, or even Hebrew, where there are different male and female ways of speaking, and it can be perceived as such. You need to be aware also of things like that. So your gender and how you identify and how you then present, remember that these things all go together in the language as well. It's not, unfortunately, just a simple thing of take the standard language and learn it. If you want to get this near native level that people seem to crave, then you need to take on board an awful lot of other information as well. Now, I feel I've gone into quite a lot of detail, and I hope that you all found that useful, and I'm happy to start looking at the questions now. So I do talk a lot, I know. Okay, so let me see. Okay, I'm a school teacher, and I find myself occasionally asking my students to focus on accuracy rather than accents. Very good. I find that absolutely right. So the accent isn't so important. Definitely the pronunciation's good, and the accent's not so important. I mean, if someone speaks to me in English and they say, "Hello, my name is Richard. I am from France. I come from Paris, and I work in London already 4 years," and I understand, and you all understand what I'm saying, I guess. It's not like you don't understand just because they've got a French accent and intonation. You understand it. One cool thing you can do, actually just doing that now in French, is try imitating the accent of the language you're learning in your own language. So if you want to speak you want to try and get the intonation right, start speaking with the accent in your own language, and then start changing out the words and grammar until you turn the language into the language that you want to learn. And that will also help you to get it as well. Because often it's easier to imitate an accent in our own language than it is in another language. I don't know why, but it's true. So hi, Richard. Indeed, it's I tend to skip the introductory chapter in pronunciation a lot. It's nice to know that you do it too, Carlos, because you're very good. And yeah, you were doing this Esperanto. Yeah, I'm I'm glad you're not going to do that anymore. That's good. But this is something that's true. This is something that actually, the more you learn languages, sometimes the more tendency you have of skipping steps in the language learning process, and it's really difficult to get it back if you get it wrong straight away. Which language was the hardest sound-wise language to learn for you? I would say actually to get the sounds together in a sentence or in words was probably Georgian. I just found that the sounds of the language were extremely tough. But weirdly, years later, after I'd been and visited Georgia, when I was sort of listening to the language being spoken, I could hear that the people didn't really speak in the way that I was trying to learn, and that they spoke in a much more natural way. And some of the sounds were softened, so they weren't these really hard sounds so much. But yeah, Georgian, I found that was actually the biggest problem for me with Georgian, was the sound of the language made it very difficult for me to remember the words, because I had no hooks, really, or very few hooks to remember the words in my brain. What language are you currently learning? So at the moment, I'm learning Korean is my main language at the moment. I'm also learning Cornish, and I'm sitting the Cornish level 1, grade 1 exam next month. I'm studying Scottish Gaelic. Again, it's a slow process, the Scottish Gaelic, and that's a language where pronunciation is super involved, and I still don't feel, after 7 months or so of learning the language, or 8 months of learning the language, I still feel like I'm really far away from reading it accurately. If someone says something in Scottish Gaelic, I can reproduce the sounds quite faithfully, but what I can't do is when I read it, pronounce it, or like a new word, for example, I don't know. There's a very high probability that I'll get it wrong. Yeah, but I really like it. And then I've been learning some Haitian Creole as well, as I mentioned before. And yeah, and there are a couple of other languages I've been playing with, but my main focus has been on those. And recently as well, in practicing to improve my Greek, to get it sort of a bit better, to improve my vocabulary and things like that. And I sort of have conversation classes in Turkish and Albanian regularly, because with the pandemic, I've not been able to speak them on the streets as normal. Yeah. Why don't we all focus on accents and phonemes so that we're better at pronunciation? Okay, yeah, I've always done that, and it works well for me. I've got my Castilian accent when I talk Spanish. Yeah, Jesus, very good. Yeah, it's absolutely true. If you focus on it and you make it a big thing, you will get it. I mean, I strongly believe that you can learn. One of the things people get worried about is the rolling of the R's, particularly English speakers say this, right? I can't do it. What do I do? I can't speak Spanish. I can't speak Italian. There are many Spanish speakers, Italian speakers, and other speakers of languages where they have a rolled R in the standard form who cannot roll their R's. Many speakers can't roll their R's. And so what they do is they make the French sounding R, the when they speak. So to give you an example from the Balkans, because in the Balkan languages as well, they roll their R's. So dobro is good, dobro. But there are people who speak Macedonian who will say dobro, dobro. In fact, there's kind of a joke as well, because many of the politicians couldn't roll their R's at one time here. And still, to this day, many of the politicians can't roll their R's. So if somebody couldn't roll their R's, you'd often hear a taxi driver or someone say, "Oh, you're going to be a politician when you grow up," because of the rolled R. And not to make fun, but also just because it is a very normal thing in society, right? It does happen. And so even if you can't produce certain sounds, there are going to be people who can't say it. In Czech, there's a sound that if that's right. That's a tongue twister in Czech with this, which is an R with a hook over the top. Many Czech speakers can't pronounce it, and many of them have to go for special training to learn how to pronounce the r in Czech. So yeah, I wouldn't worry too much if you can't pronounce particularly certain difficult sounds, or ones that even some of the people from the country can't do, because it means that the rest of the population is aware of that, and it means that they can bend their ear to understand how to compensate for sounds that a person may or may not be able to produce. I see a question about vocabulary. I will definitely get onto vocabulary if I can at the end. I'm just going to look to make sure there's nothing more about pronunciation first. The Cyprus and Crete, however, they all can understand standard Athenian accents. Yeah, they can. So certain languages, for example, they have dialects or variants that where people speak with a very strong accent, or a strong or different way of pronouncing it. Cypriot Greek and Cretan Greek would be good examples of that. However, yeah, they tend to understand the standard more easily, because that's the language that's used most often, either in school for instruction, where teachers attempt to speak in a more standard way, or also from media, TV, adverts, radio, songs tend to be in those kinds of sort of standard way of speaking for wherever the area of the country is where the standard language comes from. Oh, Carlos, you feel the same about Gaeilge? Yeah, it's true. I mean, and actually for Irish, there are many different types of Irish, so it's not even one. It's so many. Rodrigo Mendes, you're new here. Well, you're very welcome, Rodrigo. Nice to have you. It's a pleasure to see you too. Thank you for coming. How many languages do I speak fluently? I'll come back to that later if I have time. I'm just going to look for the accent and pronunciation questions first, but thank you for the question. People assume because I have an Irish accent in English that they don't need to learn the phonology of Irish. Contributes to the decline of the language because they are losing unique sounds. Yep, that's true as well. So sometimes sounds start to disappear, or sounds change in a language, because as a society we start to accept a way of speaking. In fact, there's a meme type thing on English with this on TikTok, where they sort of pronounce it. They have a sentence and they pronounce it in the way people spoke in London in the 1980s, then in the 1990s, then in the year 2000, then 2010, 2020, and then they go to 2060, and it goes into something that you can't even understand anymore. It's just like, oh, and it's quite funny, but it's very true. Yeah, many people can roll their R's for sure. You're right that many people can roll their R's if they want to. It's definitely not something that not something that people I say can't do, it's just it takes time. Can you do a Scouse accent? An Aussie accent? Well, I used to listen to like Australian TV all the time when I was younger. So like the intonation and the way Australians speak generally is not that different to what I'm used to hearing, you know, as a kid in the UK. We watched Neighbours and Home and Away, and all of those kinds of things, you know, they filter into your brain and you learn how to pronounce like the people from that country. But I'd say even with Australian, I mean, it's not going to be 100% authentic each time I do it, you know. So I don't know, what do you think? It's all right? I feel like all right, flaming galah. Okay. Yeah, awesome. Thank you. There we go. Do I study both languages every day? I study the languages regularly. So every day, Cornish, I do a little bit of close master every day. For Gaelic, actually, I probably don't do every day. The reason I'm not so concerned is that the language is related to Welsh, the Celtic languages. So getting that every single day, all of the time, isn't as important when you speak a language that's close to it. But if you don't have the time, but I do the best I can to do every day for both. Cornish, definitely, because I'm going to do the exam. And for Korean, yeah, pretty much every day I do some Korean. Otherwise, nothing would go in my brain and nothing would stay. It's just so different. So let me see. I want to learn a new language, but I'm confused on deciding what should I do. I don't know what you mean. Do you mean the language? You don't know which one to choose? You can. It depends on your situation, really. I think that's the key thing with languages. If you don't see, you know, which ones you have contact with, is the thing that sort of drives me. I'm not. Oh my word! All of the Facebook comments have just come through all of a sudden, and so I'm just going to check and see there are no. It's nice to see these agreements here. Oui, c'est vrai. Mais avec le français, c'est la même chose en fait. Avec l'anglais et le français, en fait, il y a vraiment. Lucino! Luca Lampariello is on my Facebook feed. So it's nice to see you, Lucino. Sei troppo bello per questo mondo. Sei un mito veramente, sei un mito in forma corporale. Ciao. Let me see. Sans raison concernant les références culturelles. Qui parle français, quasiment sans accent, mais pas forcément toutes nos références culturelles. Oui, c'est ça. En fait, c'est ça, en fait. Oui, c'est ça. Je suis totalement d'accord avec toi. C'est impossible. Hein. You're fairly neutral about it. Cool. Okay. I mean, I think being fairly neutral and being sort of blank canvas is quite a good way of a good approach of doing this, because you go into it without any huge expectations and stuff. So that can be a really good thing to do. You missed the live. Well, you haven't missed the live yet, Chris. I'm still here, but you can definitely look back. And the sort of the main thrust of what I was talking about with the pronunciation, my advice, is the part at the beginning. So I try and make it so that I separate the two things out to answer questions and go through the topic as well. So Richard, a problem maintaining the languages I've learned, learning new ones, advice. Yeah, it definitely needs you to, when you're learning new languages and you feel that you're sort of juggling lots of them, it can be the case that you simply need to focus on a couple, one or two, and then build on them and practice them back to back. I find that's a very good way of doing it, to start separating the languages out. So that's what I did with a number of languages I learned at the same time. When you were learning Danish, did you find yourself wanting to speak Swedish? Absolutely. Even more so with Norwegian, though, because Danish is quite a different sound in the mouth. It's very different to Swedish, whereas I find Norwegian very similar, even though Norwegians will probably kill me now for saying that. But I find Norwegian and Swedish, for me, in terms of the spoken language, are super similar. So when I try and speak Norwegian, it sounds more Swedishified. When I speak Danish, sometimes I might use Swedishy words, particularly when it gets to the numbers, and I'm like, halv tres, halv fims, and then like because I don't use the numbers very often in Danish, I find that they just go out of my head really, really quickly. I'm like Fimty. Just like use a Swedishy word with a Danish pronunciation on it and see how that works. How good is my Icelandic compared to, say, my French? It's a very different amount that I've studied them. So French I have a degree in, and I started learning from the age of 5. So French feels almost like a second native language for me, whereas Icelandic is definitely not in that category. I studied it officially, sort of the university in Iceland. I did an intensive summer course, so I've studied it to, I think they said it was a B2 level, but I don't know. I don't think I speak it to that level at all. I think probably my spoken Icelandic is more like a good at fooling people that I speak better, but I really speak kind of an A2-ish, B1-ish level. And I understand it probably B1, B2 level, but to speak it actively and to write it and reproduce it, I would say it's more like an A2, B1 level, if I'm honest, with my Icelandic. Whereas French is, I mean, I wrote my university thesis in French, so it's a very different ballgame. And I speak to my daughter in French, of course, as well. Okay. Do you think that learning to speak Norwegian to you is more like learning a new accent in English? Not quite. It definitely feels like a different language. It is fairly it's fairly easy to fool yourself into thinking you speak it better than you do, with a language like Norwegian after you've spoken Swedish or you've studied Swedish for so long. So that's kind of the issue I have with Norwegian. Whereas a different accent in English, an accent, no, but a dialect maybe is different. So, so for example, the types of words that a certain dialect would use compared to, and that I might get the words wrong. So, and it's very difficult with the dialect, if we're talking dialects instead of accents, because an accent is one thing, right? I mean, like, I can speak with a Northern Irish accent like that, and it's one thing to do that, but it's totally different if I want to speak like with an authentic way of speaking Northern Irish, like with a proper grammar, the proper slang words that people would use on the street, like sticking out and things like that. You have to learn them right enough. It's not something you can just do and turn on like a knob on a TV or something like that. No. So it's harder than that for me to learn, say, Norwegian from Swedish. Although the Northern Irish accent was probably one of the ones that I find actually quite challenging to do. That's pretty difficult to get right. And I probably, when someone from Northern Ireland hears me speak like that now, they think actually it's not very good at all. So I don't know. The Geordie accent's the same thing. Like, you can learn the way people speak, and then it's very different when they hear you speak like someone from Newcastle or someone like that, and they hear you and say, no, it doesn't sound anything like us, like Pet. But these kinds of things with an actual language and a grammar are very, very different. So to speak with a full grammar, like, say, for example, I mean, I can speak with a Scottish accent right enough. It's all right to do that. But speaking proper Scots and actually using Scots grammar and Scots words in my English or in my Scots, like speaking Scottish English is one thing, right? But speaking authentic Scots is very different, and you're not going to do that really quickly. Like, this is Scottish English right now I'm speaking. It's not Scots, because you'd have to think of the grammar and the differences between the way you represent Scotland with their Scots than how, for example, you speak Scottish English, which is something you'd hear very normally on TV in the UK. You'd hear a Scottish person speaking English, and it wouldn't be some. They would say things like "it would not be" instead of "it wouldn't be." It wouldn't be with more Scots. And this is a difference that you've got to learn when you're actually learning a language. So what would be happening for me would be I'd speak this difference, like sort of Norwegian mixed with Swedish, for example. And that kind of thing is, it's not really authentic 100%. So these are the kinds of things that I find interesting to do. Also, they can be challenging too. And sometimes a completely different accent comes out. Okay, I mean, it's totally different. Which Quelle autre langue parles-tu avec ta fille? Je parle anglais, français, espagnol, allemand, et puis avec ma femme, on parle macédonien. Donc, 5 langues de la maison. Okay, thank you very much for all these. You're very welcome for these lives. I'm glad you're enjoying them. Thank you for your kind words. I appreciate it. I'm going to see, because there was a question up here about vocabulary, and I said I'd come back to it once I'd been through all the questions about accent and pronunciation. Now, where was it? Let me see. I do excuse me if I... Okay. I think there was a question about vocabulary. Vocabulary, it's probably an entirely different live because vocabulary is, in fact, I talked a lot about how many words you need to learn last time, and I talked a little bit in my last live about some of the techniques I used to learn vocabulary. I'm happy to make or do another live. If you're interested, please do write in the comments if you're interested and you want me to talk about learning vocabulary. I'm very, very happy to do an entire live where we talk about vocabulary and how we learn, and I hope that you'll find it interesting. Thank you very much. You're very kind. Thank you for all your nice words. What's my language learning schedule? It's very hectic. I'm forever looking at language books and language stuff. Don't know, I have a really fixed schedule. I do have certain classes and hours that I put into my calendar so that I definitely commit to certain times. And then throughout the day, I'll sort of play with whatever I fancy playing with. It's nothing so crazy. Do you know if there are any resources that focus on different accents? I think that you probably need to find people who speak them. I don't know, it depends on, there are so many accents that you can choose from. I think you'd have to find resources or materials or people who can help you with that. I do remember that a friend of mine once, years ago, he was Swedish, and he learned to speak with a Northern Irish accent, right? So like I wanted to speak like with a Northern Irish accent because it's different to the English that you learn at school. And I was like, that's great, yeah, so what's the crack with you here? And he looked at me and he said, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean the crack? What's the crack about? And I was like, you can't learn a Northern Irish accent and not learn what's the crack, because that's very core to Irish English, is what's the crack, is like, how's it going? I mean, so this is why I say maybe it's a good idea to learn with somebody who speaks or is at least familiar with the dialect that you're aiming for, because there are going to be things like that that are very common. But when you watch, say, TV like Netflix or something, sometimes some of these things can be sort of filtered and purified so that it becomes a more standard way. Like I was doing with the Scottish accent, I was speaking it in a very standard way, very standard Scottish English, instead of sort of adding in lots of Scots words, which Scottish English speakers would actually pepper their language with Scots as well. So there's almost kind of a diglossia thing going on where they mix the two languages, they merge. English and Scots will merge in Scottish English, and so they will say things that that would not be standard Scottish English, but are Scots. And yeah, but when you hear it on TV, very often, unless it's a very specific word that they know, most speakers of English would understand, like do you ken, do you know? Most people will understand that. Even in the US, people would understand do you ken? Do you ken the problem? Do you ken what I'm talking about? Do you know? But Scottish English would use know as well. Do you know? But the Scots would more be ken. Do you ken? And we have ken in English too as a word, but it's used often as a noun. So it's beyond my ken. It's beyond my knowledge. Yeah. If you haven't seen the vocabulary one, I definitely advise you to go back and have a look. It was just last week. So as I say, I try and make it very obvious what the topics are about each time. So I hope that it makes it easy for you to find things that you're interested in. And yeah, very, very happy to do more. I'm glad that yeah. Let me see. I'm glad the Northern Irish accent didn't get that too badly. Yeah, I don't want to sort of. I want to make sure I do it faithfully, or as faithfully as possible. I inadvertently made you do several accents. Yes, you did. Terrell. Yes, you did. Scottish English. You love Scottish English. I like Scottish English. I actually like Scots as a language too, and I studied it last summer for 3 weeks intensively and really enjoyed it. What was the most difficult for you when you were learning Danish? Oh, Danish, wow. The numbers probably, because, yeah, I mean, there's a whole comedy thing, right, on YouTube where they pretend that the numbers were made up and that actually Danish people don't use them. But I know it's a joke, but it's they do sort of, yeah, they do get a bit weird when you sort of, the rest of the language is quite accessible, except for the pronunciation is different, but the rest of Danish is quite accessible and quite easy to follow, even when you hear it or if you read it particularly. And then you get to the numbers, and the numbers are like, wow, okay, just look nothing like anything else. So probably, yeah, the numbers. Now, the pronunciation is also challenging to get in an authentic way, of course. Okay, when will be the moment that you think that you already learned a language? So when do I think that I can like stop learning a language? Actually, that really depends on my goal for the language. So if I get to a point where I think, okay, I already speak a language, then or to the level I need for what I need it for, then I sometimes will just stop and keep just using it instead. We've got to the hour, so I would love to see you again next week, same time, same place. Looking forward to that, and obviously I'm talking next week as well at the Polyglot Gathering. So please do join the Polyglot Gathering if you haven't already signed up. This is my shirt from 2014, and please do come and join us. It's organized by some lovely people who are friends of mine, and they started it after the Polyglot conference in 2013 that I organized, and the first one was in 2014. And this year it's online, so you'll be able to join in, and I will be speaking at that, and a number of other great people will be talking too. You'll get to meet lots of great people. You get to have a lot of fun, practice your languages, and yeah, I hope you will come to the Polyglot Gathering, as I'm going to go and attend, and then obviously I'll be working towards the Polyglot Conference in October too, which is my own event. And thank you all again very much. It was a pleasure to see you for this live, and please do come again if you have any other ideas for things you want me to talk about, things that are important for you. Let me know, and I'm happy to dedicate an entire live to you. All right, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.